I still remember the moment I stepped off the plane. The air felt different, colder than I expected. America, the land of dreams and opportunity. But for me it was a land of uncertainty. I left my home, my family, and everything I knew to find a better life. I carried my mother's words in my heart. Be strong, be careful, and never forget who you are. Finding a job was not easy. My accent made me stand out, and my hijab reminded people that I was different. Some looked at me with curiosity, others with something I couldn't quite name. But I refused to give up. I needed to work. I needed to survive. Then one day my prayers were answered. I was offered a job as a nanny for a family of 4. It seemed perfect, a place to stay, a steady income, and children to care for. I had always loved children. I thought this was the fresh start I needed. I had no idea how much my life was about to change. The house was beautiful, large, and filled with light. The moment I walked in, I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. The wife greeted me first. She was elegant, professional, and always in a hurry. She had a firm handshake and a polite smile. But I could tell she was a busy woman. Work came first for her. "Welcome," she said, her voice warm but distant. "The children are 6 and 4. They need a lot of attention. I hope you're good with kids." "Yes, ma'am," I replied softly. "I love children." She nodded, then turned to call someone. A moment later he walked in, the husband. He was different. His presence filled the room in a way that made me feel strange. He was tall, well-groomed, and had a smile that felt too warm, too inviting. He held out his hand. "Welcome to our home. We're lucky to have you." His eyes met mine, and for a second I forgot to breathe. I quickly looked away. He's just being kind, I told myself. But deep inside something felt different. The days passed quickly. I settled into my role, taking care of the children, cleaning, and making sure everything was in order. The wife was rarely home. Her job kept her away most of the day, sometimes late into the night. That meant I spent more time with the husband. He was always around, always watching, always smiling. First it was just kindness. "You're doing a great job," he would say, his voice smooth and gentle. "The children love you. We appreciate you." I would nod and smile, keeping my responses short. But his words stayed with me, replaying in my mind long after he left the room. Then came the small gestures. A cup of tea when I looked tired. A blanket when I sat outside in the cold evening air. A soft thank you whispered in passing. I told myself it was nothing. He was just a kind man. But my heart started betraying me. I found myself waiting for his words, looking forward to his presence. It started with little things. Small compliments. A laugh shared over something silly the children did. The way he would pause and watch me as I played with them, as if he was seeing something no one else did. One evening, as I finished folding laundry, he walked in. "You do so much for this family. I hope you know how much we appreciate you." I looked up, my hand still holding a neatly folded shirt. "Thank you, sir. Please," he said, smiling. "Call me by my name." Hesitated. Felt too personal, too informal. But I nodded. Then, one rainy afternoon, everything changed. The children were asleep. The house was quiet. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes, when I felt him enter the room. He stood by the window, watching the rain, a glass of wine in his hand. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" he said. His voice softer than usual. Turned to look. He smiled. "You don't have to call me that." I swallowed hard, focusing back on the dishes. I should finish my work. He stepped closer. "You work too hard. Do you ever take a break?" Forced a laugh. "There's always something to do." He watched me for a moment, then nodded. "You're special, you know that." Something in my chest tightened. I didn't respond. Couldn't. Because deep inside I knew this was no longer just kindness, and I was standing at the edge of something dangerous. The rain drummed softly against the windows, a steady rhythm that filled the quiet house. The children were asleep, their soft breaths the only sound in their room. I had just finished folding their tiny clothes, my mind focused on the simplicity of my work. It was peaceful until I felt his presence. I turned to see him standing by the kitchen window, a glass of wine in his hand. His gaze was distant, watching the raindrops streak across the glass. Something about him felt different in that moment. His usual light-hearted presence was replaced by a quiet intensity. "Do you drink?" he asked suddenly, turning to face me. I shook my head. "Oh, sir." He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "You don't have to call me that." I swallowed, pretending to focus on wiping the counter. "It's respectful." "Respectful but distant," he said softly. "You're not just the nanny. You're part of this home." I didn't know how to respond. The warmth in his voice made my stomach twist. I wanted to believe it was just kindness, but deep inside I knew there was something more. A long silence stretched between us, broken only by the occasional sigh of the wind outside. Then, just as I turned to leave, he said, "Can we talk?" Froze. "About what?" "About you. About how hard you work. About how much I appreciate you." His words sent a shiver down my spine. I wanted to run, to leave the kitchen and pretend this moment never happened. But my feet stayed planted to the ground. That night I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying the moment in the kitchen over and over again. His voice, his presence, it lingered in the air like a forbidden perfume. I told myself I was overthinking. He was just being kind, appreciative of my work. But another part of me, the part that lay awake in the darkness, knew that wasn't true. The way he looked at me, the way his voice softened when he spoke my name, it wasn't just kindness. It was something dangerous. Something that made my heart pound and my breath quicken. I squeezed my eyes shut, whispering a silent prayer. "God, please help me. Please guide me away from temptation." But my mind refused to listen. Instead it wandered. I thought about the way he smiled, the way he laughed when playing with the children. The way he noticed small things like when I was tired or when I needed a break. I hated myself for thinking these thoughts. He was married. He had a wife who trusted me with her children, her home. How could I even allow these emotions to take root? But no matter how much I scolded myself, I couldn't ignore the truth. I liked the way he made me feel. Days passed, but the tension between us remained. I tried to avoid him, burying myself in work, always finding something to clean, to organize, to distract myself. But he always found a way to be near me. One afternoon, as I was folding clothes in the laundry room, he appeared at the doorway. "You never take breaks," he observed, stepping inside. I forced a smile. "There's always something to do." He watched me for a long moment before stepping closer. "You work so hard for this family." "For me?" I swallowed, suddenly unable to breathe properly. "It's my job." "It's more than just a job to you, isn't it?" His voice was soft, almost a whisper. I couldn't look at him. If I did, I knew I would see something in his eyes that I wasn't ready to acknowledge. "You're special," he continued. "I see how much you care, how much you give, and I want you to know that I see you." I bit my lip, my fingers tightening around the fabric in my hands. "Sure, we can't." "I know," he interrupted. "I know it's wrong. But tell me you don't feel it too." My breath caught in my throat. Felt it. I felt it in the way my heart raced, in the way my skin tingled under his gaze. I felt it in the nights I lay awake, thinking about moments like this. But I couldn't say it. saying it would make it real. And if it became real, there would be no turning back. I shook my head, finally daring to look up at him. You have a wife. Family. His jaw tightened. She's never here. That doesn't change what's right and wrong. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. I don't want to make you uncomfortable. I just needed you to know. He turned to leave, and for a moment I thought that would be the end of it. That he would walk away. And this dangerous game we had started would be over. But as he reached the door, he paused. If you ever change your mind. And then he was gone. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty doorway. My heart pounding in my chest. I should have felt relief. I should have thanked God that nothing had happened. But instead all I felt was something terrifying. I felt disappointment. And that was when I knew I was already too far gone. Days turned into weeks. And our stolen moments became routine. Started subtly. Longer conversations, lingering glances, accidental touches that neither of us pulled away from. The tension between us thickened. Yet we both pretended it wasn't there. I told myself every morning that today would be different. That I would keep my distance, keep my head down and just do my job. But by afternoon, I would find myself drawn to him again. Conversation in the kitchen. A soft smile as he passed by. A simple touch as he handed me something. I lived for those moments. And I hated myself for it. I felt like I was trapped in a web of emotions I never asked for. Every time I prayed, I asked for strength. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. One evening as I put the children to sleep, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to find him standing there, watching me. They love you, he said. I swallowed. They are easy to love. His eyes softened. So are you. I knew then that this was no longer just a game. This was something more, something deeper. And it terrified me. The more time we spent together, the more I felt like I belonged in that house, not as a worker, but as something more. He made me feel special, needed. One day he brought home a small gift for me. A simple bracelet, delicate and beautiful. Just a thank you, he said when he handed it to me. I hesitated before taking it. I don't think. Please, he interrupted. You deserve it. I took it, feeling my heart betray me again. He was changing me. I no longer saw him as my employer's husband. I saw him as someone I wanted, someone who wanted me. I told myself I wasn't taking his wife's place. But deep down I knew better. I started dressing differently. Wearing the colors he once mentioned he liked on me. I paid attention to his habits. Memorizing the way he liked his coffee. The way he ran his hand through his hair when he was tired. I was slipping into something dangerous, something that didn't belong to me. But I didn't want to stop. And then it happened. One evening, after the children were asleep and the rain poured outside, he found me in the kitchen. He stood by the window, swirling a glass of wine, watching the droplets slide down the glass. Do you drink? He asked, his voice deep and inviting. I shook my head, feeling my heart race. Well, he placed the glass down and stepped closer. Can we talk? I should have walked away. I should have reminded him that he had a wife, a family. But I stayed. He reached out, touching my arm gently. Tell me to stop and I will. I opened my mouth, but no words came. His touch burned through my skin, igniting something I had fought so hard to suppress. Before I knew it, our lips met. It was slow at first, hesitant. Then hunger took over. He lifted me, carrying me to the bedroom, his room, their room. As his hands traced every inch of my body, I whispered my faith, my religion. But those words faded into the night. That night was the beginning of a storm neither of us could stop. It wasn't just one night. It wasn't just a mistake. became our secret, our routine. Mornings were filled with stolen glances, afternoons with touches that lingered, and nights with passion that consumed us both. I lost myself in him. I craved his touch, his words, the way he made me feel like I was the only woman in the world. But every morning guilt clawed at my heart. Guilt became my constant companion. Every time his wife spoke to me, every time she thanked me for taking care of her children, I felt like I was suffocating. I avoided her eyes. I avoided my own reflection. I avoided thinking about the truth. But the guilt wasn't enough to stop me. Not when he looked at me like I was the most important person in his world. Then one night, I woke up from a dream about him. My body burned with shame, my chest heavy with regret. I sat up in bed, pressing my hands against my face. This has to stop, I whispered to myself. But the next morning when I saw him, he only had to smile for my resolve to shatter. Everything fell apart the day I caught his wife staring at me differently. It was subtle, a pause in her greeting, a hesitation in her smile. Something in her eyes made my stomach drop. She knew. She didn't have proof, but she felt it. A wife always knows when something is wrong. I had to leave. That night I sat outside lost in my thoughts. He found me there, concern in his eyes. "You've been distant," he said. "What's wrong?" I inhaled sharply. "I can't do this anymore." His expression changed, his jaw tightening. "Don't say that." I stood up, forcing myself to be strong. "Have to go." He reached for my hand, his grip firm. Tears burned in my eyes. "Can't." The next day, I handed in my resignation. His wife was surprised, asking me why, telling me I was part of their family. I had no answer that wouldn't betray me. When I packed my bags, I placed the bracelet he had given me on the nightstand. I walked away, carrying nothing but my guilt and the lesson I would never forget. I had crossed a line, and some lines could never be uncrossed. I thought I had convinced myself that leaving was the right choice, that I could walk away and never look back. But the day before I was set to leave, one of the children asked me a question that nearly broke me. "Are you going to leave us?" Her voice was small, innocent. Her wide eyes searched mine for reassurance, for comfort. I swallowed hard. "Why would you ask that?" She fiddled with the hem of her dress, her tiny fingers twisting the fabric nervously. "Because you don't smile anymore. And you don't laugh with Daddy like before." The weight of her words pressed against my chest like a heavy stone. I had let myself become part of this family. And she had noticed the shift in me. For a moment I considered lying. Telling her that I wasn't going anywhere. That things would be just the same tomorrow as they were today. But that would be cruel. Instead, I forced a smile and tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. "I will always love you. No matter what." She didn't understand, and I prayed she never would. The night before I left, I sat in my room, staring at my packed bags. My heart ached with every breath I took. He came to me one last time. "Don't do this," he whispered. I shook my head, tears slipping down my cheeks. "We both know this has to end." He stepped closer, his hands reaching for me. "Love you." I closed my eyes, letting those words sink in one last time. I had dreamed of hearing them, but now they only brought pain. "You have a wife. Family. You don't belong to me." His fingers traced my cheek. "But I want to." I pulled away, summoning every ounce of strength I had left. "No, you don't. You just think you do." He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "I can't lose you." I picked up my bag and stepped past him. "You already have." I walked out without looking back. Even when I heard his sharp intake of breath. Even when I felt his gaze burning into my back. even when my heart shattered into pieces. I didn't go straight home. Couldn't. Instead, I found myself in a quiet park, sitting on a wooden bench, staring at the sky. I thought of my mother, of the night she had held my hands, telling me that God's mercy was endless, that no mistake was too great to be forgiven. But could I forgive myself? I closed my eyes and whispered the words I had been too afraid to say before. Sorry. Sorry to the wife who had trusted me. Sorry to the children who had loved me. Sorry to myself for allowing my heart to lead me where I should never have gone. Tears fell freely. But for the first time in months, they weren't tears of guilt. They were tears of release. I knew the road to forgiveness wouldn't be easy, but I had taken the first step, and that was enough for now.